Forensic Science Lecture 4-2, Role of a Forensic Anthropologist. Investigations concerned with identification and examination of human skeletal remains all falls under the area of an anthropologist. They can provide, bones can provide a multitude of individual characteristics long after the individual has died. We can determine a victim's sex, their approximate age, race, height, natural or the nature of any physical injuries that they may have had. The recovery and the processing of the remains need to be treated as with any crime scene, as protected and uncontaminated as possible. The scene must be secured as soon as possible to prevent any further alterations. Doesn't matter if it's been a day, a week, a year, 35 years. They need to treat it as if it is its own brand new crime scene. And then search to locate all the bones or other evidence that may have been left or discarded. Sometimes animals have caused a problem with this in scattering the remains, or weather may have washed away some. And so where you would initially see the bones doesn't mean that that's where all of them are going to be. A number of tools that can be used to search for bones is aerial photography, metal detectors, ground penetrating radar, GPR, infrared photography, any apparatus that detects gases that are produced during the decomposition process. Cadaver dogs have the ability to identify remains, but as items are found, they all need to be tagged, photographed, and sketched, as well as documented within notes, as with any crime scene. So the sex of the decedent can be determined by the size, shape of various skeletal features, especially the pelvic and cranial bones or the skull bones. In a female, pelvic bones form a wider, more circular opening, whereas the male's pelvic bones are more narrow, non-circular. The fact that the female's pelvic bones are wider actually aids in the childbearing process. So there's an anatomical purpose behind it. The sacrum is also wider and shorter in the female. In the male, it's roughly equal width with height. With the subpubic angle, it's approximately 90 degrees in a female. In a male, it's going to be less than 90 degrees. The subpubic angle is the angle formed at the bottom of the pelvis, where the two bones come together. The cranium in a female is overall it's smaller, and there's less protruding brow. And a mastoid process. And the mastoid process is the lower portion of the temporal bone right behind the ear. It's a little less pronounced. These are typical cases. Obviously, everyone is different anatomically and physiologically, and so it doesn't necessarily going to be clear-cut as this, but they're good guidelines. So here are some of the pictures that go along with it. As you see, the pubic angle, male versus female, sacrum, cranial bones, and so on. Here are some more features that they'll look for when trying to determine between male or female. Again, general guidelines, but different for all. There is a method for determining the age, and it's basically looking at the growth stages. And so if we are looking to identify if it's an infant or a toddler, it could be estimated by the length of the bone compared to the growth curve. So typically they look at long bones, femurs, humerus. in the skull of an infant and a toddler, there's going to be different stages of fusing between the different bones in the skull. The appearance of a fused or divided section can help to estimate that age. Children, if you're identifying if it's a child, uses the fusion or lack of fusion of the epiphyseal plate, which is basically our growth plate. It looks at the mandible, the fingers, wrists, basically any long bone or the clavicles. They tend to have smaller craniums, can also indicate that it's a child, along with the presence of any developing adult teeth. And so an infant formation of teeth can be used to determine age, because of the fact that the formation of our permanent teeth actually start at birth. The pubic symphysis is the area where the two pelvic bones come together. It's a raised platform. It starts off rough and rugged and then slowly changes to smooth into a well-defined area as the individual gets older. And so after the age of 21, there's levels of changes of the surface of the bone, such as within the pubic symphysis. And these again are average age closures. Not all skeletons display these closures at the same ages, but it gives us a better idea. And so these are some of the bones that they're looking at. As you see, the newborn to the child to the adult bone. The pubic symphysis is on the bottom picture there. As you see, it's very jagged. As it gets younger, as we weight bear, it starts to smooth out, and then the growth plate as well. These are some of the average closures of these plates based on age. Again, this is all going to be on average. Okay, so some of them may not fall under that and can give not necessarily false readings of an age, but can vary. And so typically you're going to see an age range as opposed to a definite age. When looking at bones, you can also find a racial ancestry by the appearance of various cranial aspects. So of Asian descent, the eye orbitals tend to be more circular. The frontal plane of the cranium are more flat or projected outward. The nasal cavity is smaller and rounder. In European descent, the eye orbits are oval. The frontal plane are more flat. Nasal cavity tends to be long and narrow. In the African descent, the eye orbits are more square. The frontal plane and cranium are projected outward. And then the nasal cavities are wider. But again, these are typical features, but not all skeletons are going to display, especially with the mixed races that we have in today's world. So people can have various features of nationalities. When discussing the different descents, Asian descent is also known as a Mongoloid descent. European descent is also known as Caucasian or Caucasoid descent, and African descent is also known as Negroid descent. So those are synonymous with one another, so sometimes they're referred to either or. Here's a little bit more or a larger picture of the different features of each of the craniums enlarged so you can identify those. Another area that they can determine is the height of the decedent. And this is estimated by using measurements of long bones, mostly in the lower limbs, so your femur and so on. But the stature calculations are made with a known equation, and then based on sex and race, it helps to determine the height of that individual. Typically, these calculations can estimate within 5 centimeters of the actual height of the individual. So these are the equations that are used to estimate height. Again, ancestry plays a role, and then male, female is also going to play a big role in estimating the height of the individual. Other contributing areas within forensic anthropologists may be to create a facial reconstruction. Clay is actually placed over the cranium using the estimated age, ancestry, and sex. Each of these have a variance on how deep the tissue is going to be away from the cranial bone. And so as they place the clay over the actual cranium, based on these other aspects, they can come up with a pretty good likeness of the individual. It's also helpful in identifying victims from things like mass disasters, such as like a plane crash, where it's really hard to identify the different people. They can also use dental records as well, as long as the bones haven't been destroyed too much. Nowadays, with facial reconstruction, most of the time it's done with a computer generated or aided system, but sometimes they'll still do the clay reconstruction. This ends lecture 4-2. There's a quiz next class.